Hello, everyone, and welcome in here to the Powercat Podcast. I'm Cole Carmody. With me today, my good friend Ryan Wallace. Yes, this is another podcast. This is another questions podcast, much like you hear our own Tim Fitzgerald, Zach Carlson, Ryan Gilbert on the podcast platform. We decided, you know what, why not try and do another one? There's so much to talk about with K-State sports, and you know what, who better than Wally and I to kind of dig into some stuff. We got your questions from Wabash Station. We have put those into StreamYard. We'll put those up there. You'll get a nice little shout out, and we'll talk about some questions, Wally. There's just so much to discuss.
Yeah, it's it hasn't been busy around K-State athletics or anything, right, Cole?
Not at all.
There's not a whole lot to talk about.
Nothing, right? It's every day it seems like there's something new. I mean, literally, it feels like every 15 minutes the past week or so, something's been coming out, whether it be the whole situation with Naquan Tomlin to recruiting. I know you and I have been very busy dealing with that, but it's a fun time.
Yeah, I'm happy to just be the football guy right now. I'm very content just worrying about football and the transfer portal and signing day because I'm very happy being the football guy right now.
Well, signing day's right around the corner. We'll get into some questions that deal with recruiting, but let's just go ahead and jump into it. The first question comes from Go State Kate. He says, am I caught in an abusive relationship with K-State athletics? I know you're referring to everything that's going on that's around K-State athletics the past few weeks. It's been quite the challenge as we kind of talked about to cover it, but I mean, let's just kind of talk about everything. This is a good segue to kind of get your thoughts on not just, the Naquan Tomlin situation, but the Colin Klein situation and really just everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and stick to football as much as I can here. That's more my bread and butter. That's really the lane that I want to stay in at the moment. But when you think about football, I wonder if maybe with the Tomlin situation added into this, I wonder too, though, if the way that football finished adds to kind of the sour feeling right now. And I shouldn't say it's completely sour, and we'll get into it more because K-State football recruiting is starting to pick up a little bit, and there's obviously excitement around the bowl game, being able to see some of these new and younger faces get more action in the bowl game, or so we hope, so we think. But I really start to wonder when you think back if some of the feelings that are lingering aren't just because Colin Klein left and aren't just, because of maybe, Will Howard's exit to the transfer portal and, Ben Sinnott going to the NFL draft and not having a chance to see those guys play again in purple, but the lackluster kind of showing that they had down the stretch. There's Iowa State, but let's be honest, Cole, even before Iowa State, the Sunflower Showdown in Lawrence wasn't really the greatest performance. Yep. And so I start to think, had they gone out and taken care of business against the Jayhawks in a little bit more of a commanding fashion, if they had, even in a loss to Iowa State, if they had played a little bit better, if all of that wouldn't have snowballed quite the way that we've seen into the month of December. But either way, this is a month, this is their chance to rebound, finish on a high note, and get fans excited for the year to come with, again, as we've laid out before, all of the things on their to-do list this month. I don't envy that the coaching staff at the Veneer Complex right now, but again, they have as much as kind of wow. Okay, let's try this again, folks.
Words.
As much as has been taken, I think, from Kansas State and from the coaching staff, I think the same could be said that there's still a lot on their plate, and there's still a chance for them to rebound and have, again, fans be very eager for 2024 laying ahead.
I think you said snowball earlier, literally snowballed. It feels like ever since that Iowa State game, things have literally gone downhill for this, not necessarily the program, because I still think the program's in a really good shape. I mean, we'll dig into that a little bit. I think this program is fine. They're going to be fine, but everything kind of happened at once, right? I think that's part of the reason fans are so anxious is when you throw in that situation, and really, well, you want to throw in the basketball team. kind of underperforming maybe to fans' expectations.
Oh, sure.
That's probably part of the reason why there's a lot of people that are just frustrated with everything. And anytime, you don't play a game, right? Like that's the thing about football. If that Iowa State game would have happened a week before or 2 weeks before, well, you can flush it out of your system and play another game. But that's how you end. And
Right.
so it feels really, really bad as a fan. And quite honestly, those guys in the locker room are extremely frustrated. And there's nobody that wants to take that and reverse that day and make that day never happen more than those guys inside of that veneer complex. But really, it just comes down to how do you stay the course. And so, I mean, I understand why fans are upset, and I especially understand it with the backdrop of everything that's going on with, of course, the president and Coach Tang and those comments, and I understand all that. There's really no need to dig into that much more, but I understand why fans are frustrated because it's been a hard time.
Well, and I think back to, I keep thinking back to the schedule here, and it's been so long since we've played football. I'm having to remind myself of the schedule, but the K-State goes 8-4, but again, I think they had a chance in my mind to really come back and maybe finish on a little bit more of a high note to where it would have felt more like, a typical 8-4 season or even a 9-3 season if they had beaten Iowa State on senior night, because, even though they lost at Texas and there was a lot of things about that game that were frustrating, you lose to a team that ends up being in the college football playoff by 3 points.
And 4 yards away.
Right. And you're coming off three dominating. If you go back to Texas Tech, the defense didn't dominate that game, but Avery Johnson, the offense did. 3 dominating wins in a row there. You go at Texas, you lose, as you said, by the narrowest of margins. If they had just come back, done what they did against Baylor, and then continued carrying that momentum through Kansas and Iowa State. And again, I understand that that's easier said than done. Kansas statistically has been one of the better teams in the Big 12 this season, even if the record didn't show it. And Iowa State on defense, even had the snow not happened, I think that would have been a tough matchup for Kansas State. But again, it's just kind of the way that things floundered at the end. I don't think that helped matters as we entered the month of December. It was an 8-4 year, Cole, that in a lot of ways didn't really feel as good as 8-4 should feel.
If the losses are placed differently throughout the season, 8-4 looks a whole heck of a lot different than how it did at the end of the year.
Right.
Yep. That kind of brings us to our next question here from Americat. Any locker room concerns for football? His question also mentioned the transfer portal and some specific maybe family members or outspoken people regarding the status of the program of the transfers. I don't really want to call anybody out because I don't think that necessarily does any good. Everybody's different for transfers. Personally, as far as concerns go, I don't really have much. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I mean, in terms of the family stuff, right? That dynamic is going to differ depending on who you talk to, and you're going to get outspoken folks that are, if you want to call it, happy that they're out, happy that their son is off the team, just as much as you're going to talk to people that are upset and sad and unfortunate that it took place, right? And there's been publicly one on each side. And there have been other parents that have kind of chosen to be more behind the scenes. And those that I've talked to have been very gracious, very thankful for their son's time at Kansas State. And for one reason or other, sometimes it's that the son, Cole, wants to leave and the parents are like, please think about this. And then other times it's a mutual decision on both parties, including the parents. But again, I think it's kind of like when you think about message boards, right? That unfairly or sometimes maybe fairly, depending on whatever the site is. And I'm not even just talking about Kansas State. You can go to think about Memphis. You can think about Seahawks, or Kansas City Chiefs chat rooms, right?
Oh boy.
The vocal minority kind of takes over in those situations. And so you have to step back for a second and remind yourself that there are other people that might not be speaking their voice that have a completely different opinion. And you can't let yourself get swept up on what you see online. But I will say this, Cole, I want to get in a little bit to the transfer portal. And I have an entire article that I don't think is ever going to see the light of day at GoPowercat, because I started writing it and I revised it a million times. It doesn't read easily because I feel like in a lot of ways I could just explain my opinion and my angle to this a lot better than trying to write it out. But I've been going back and forth in my head about a lot of people that I've seen. Again, I shouldn't be referencing the vocal minority, but I'm going to reference the vocal minority here again, because I do think in this case, it is more of a universally accepted opinion, is that the transfer portal exits that we've seen from Kansas State this cycle really haven't been stingers. They really haven't been huge impact players or contributors, guys that are, quote, irreplaceable, right? And I think to a large extent that has proven true, at least from a statistical standpoint, or what we expected, right? I mean, Will Howard, very few of us expected that he would return. That wasn't really a surprise. Trayshawn Ward might have been a little bit of a surprise, but again, I think you and I agreed that I didn't, even though he had an extra year of eligibility, I never went into this season thinking that he would utilize it.
Right.
And again, I've gone on record of talking about, do I think they could have used Trayshawn Ward differently? Yes. But again, he's not somebody that's irreplaceable. So really, when you start to think about it, there's guys like Kobe Savage, Nate Matlack, and I think depending on what side of the fence you fall on, maybe a guy like Will Lee, right? But everybody else, it seems like it's kind of been universally accepted that, oh, well, we'll get better. We'll find more guys. These guys probably weren't fit for this level, what have you. I'm about to go on a real tangent here, Cole. So just,
oh boy, here we go.
Here's where I stand on this. On one end of the spectrum, there's these guys aren't irreplaceable. We can find guys that are better, and we can improve, and we can get some of these guys that really weren't making an impact out of the way, so we can fill with guys that are going to make a bigger impact. Here's though the problem specifically with a program to me like K-State that is, its blueprint, its blood is in development. It's a developmental program. It will always be a developmental program. And what I mean by that is they're always going to be a program that can't live on 4- and 5-star athletes. They're going to always have to take some guys that slip through the cracks, some guys that other Power Fives don't think are worthy to play at their level. And they're going to have to coach and build those guys up based on some of their strengths and make them into players that we've become accustomed to watching at Kansas State. So to me, the problem here, when you start to see this happen year over year, and granted, we did not see it happen last year, so maybe that's part of the reason why we're seeing some bigger numbers this year, is when you win a Big 12 title, there's a lot of guys that kind of tap the brakes a little bit on whether they want to leave or not. Like, we got a good thing going here. Maybe I want to stick around and be a part of this. Then you kind of have the year like you have this year, and you get more of those guys that are like, no, on second thought, I think I do want out of here. But here's where, and I started to find some stats here, so bear with me. You start to go through, and I went back and I found some other coaches that were hired in 2019 when Chris Kleiman was, to look and see if maybe there are other like programs that have experienced the kind of mass departures that we've seen from their 2020 and 2021 classes like we've seen at K-State. Bear in mind here, folks, that between the 2020 and the 2021 classes, I did it based on our 247 database and the commitments. K-State has witnessed an exit rate between those two classes of 69.5%.
Wow.
Cole, almost 70% of the
incredible.
scholarship guys they've signed are no longer here.
And the thing about that is, and I'm going to let you keep going here in a second.
No, you're good. You're good.
I've seen some people say, oh, well, they kept the right guys. Well,
right.
Yeah, they kept the right guys because those are the guys that are playing. But you're not referencing the guys that aren't playing. You're talking about the guys that left.
Right.
So had those guys stayed, they would be playing too. But continue on.
69.5%. So that forces this staff's hand to not only fill those 32 roster vacancies, scholarship roster vacancies, not preferred walk-ons, but again, not only replace them, but attempt to replace them with like, if not better talent. And Kansas State, if you look at the averages, outside of the 2023 class, which we can talk more about here in a second, that they haven't proven that it's just going to continually get better across the board, right? I think year over year, Kleiman's gotten a little bit better, but each year there are areas where you're like, well, maybe that's not as strong as it looks on paper. Maybe that's not as strong as it looks on paper. So anyway, getting back to the 2019 coaches, I went and looked, and I decided to focus on Maryland's Mike Locksley, North Carolina's Mac Brown, and West Virginia's Neil Brown. Okay. I think that those are all programs that, you can debate, where they stand between K-State if you want to compare.
Very
them.
like programs.
I think for the most part, when you think about NIL, when you think about their stature in their respective conferences, where they sit geographically, maybe there's some things where they could recruit a little bit easier, but overall they've got equal, if not better competition to play around with out there and try and out recruit. I like those three, right? Mm-hmm. So you look at Mac Brown. Mac Brown and UNC have gone 23-16 over the past 3 years. Their exit rate is 44%. You look at Mike Locksley at Maryland. They've gone 22-16. Their exit rate is 48%. You look at Neil Brown and West Virginia, who has gone 19-18 in this same timeline. And we think about all the guys that West Virginia had lost coming out of the coaching change, right? And how, what's going on in Morgantown with Neil Brown. Even their classes of 20 and 2021 are 60% exit rate. So they're losing guys, but it's still almost 10% less than what K-State has witnessed. And so it comes back to me, Cole, of how do you have a program that's 26-13 since 2021, including a Fiesta Bowl and a Big 12 championship, and they're the ones struggling with roster retention. And to me, it comes back because at the end of the day, a lot of the fillers that they keep losing are the ones that are now supposed to be bridging the gap between your first string and your scout team.
Right.
And here's where this becomes a problem. And here's where you laugh at, the Jordan Perrys of the world and all these guys that are leaving, right? Yeah, they weren't making a huge difference. But the problem is this over time can become detrimental to your program because it sets you back. In a lot of ways, if those guys in 2020 and 2021 had turned out the way that they were supposed to, or more of them even had just taken the progression that you want if you're K-State, you don't have Jacob Parrish starting as a sophomore. And Jacob Parrish has turned into a good player. Should Jacob Parrish be starting at the Big 12 level on a Power 5 team as a sophomore?
He should be that third. He should have redshirted last year, right? Like he should have redshirted last year, been the third cornerback this year, to where the next year he's ready to take one of those starting spots.
Jace Brown turned into a really good player. Jace Brown proved himself to be worthy of starting and playing heavily for K-State this season. Perfect world, Jace Brown should not see the field as a freshman. Maybe you have a handful of those guys that are really good. But again, if you're talking developmentally, the structure that I think Chris Kleiman would love to see play out is if you're a freshman, you're redshirting. Aside from a couple, I'm not saying overall. In general, you're freshman, you're going to redshirt. Your redshirt freshmen, your sophomores are dipping their toes in the water. A few of them might be ready. Otherwise, they're dipping their toes in the water. They're getting more acclimated in their first year or two. Junior year, you're starting to contribute more. You're teetering with the third, second team, to where by your senior year and thereafter, if you've got a 6 year of eligibility or whatever, you are now either a starter or you are heavily involved in the rotation. And so again, when you start losing guys, and again, I'm not even talking as much about not even this portal class. You go back and start looking at some of the other guys that they've lost. I'm going to pull it up here while I've got it handy, Cole. But I'm thinking back to let's go 2023. Bear with me here, folks. You think back to guys like Jalen Clem. You think about Omar Daniels. You think about Whit Mitchum. Crew Jackson's a great example.
Yes, that is.
Right?
Because he would have played this year.
TJ Smith. Those are guys that, again, in an ideal world, were good enough, or if you'd given them a little bit more time, again, if they wanted to stay, some of those guys might be homesick, and that's a whole nother deal. But when you start to lose that many guys, you lose that bridge. And so instead of Chris Kleiman and them being able to get to what their bread and butter is, which is finding those lower level guys and finding the guys that other programs don't think maybe are quite as good, and being able to build them up, like Felix Anudike-Uzama, like all the other guys that we've seen that have become, more impact players, like a Jace Brown, who is lower in this class. That's where this staff's bread and butter is. Allowing them to get back to that, allowing them to maybe just focus on instant impact transfer guys. Now they're having to do that along with trying to maybe get some guys that are more bulk of the roster, more meat of the roster. And so then you're getting guys into the program, and you've got a Jace Brown that maybe was intended to be scout team, and you're going, we can't have you be scout team. We need you to go now. Trey Spivey, we need you now, because, I don't want to throw guys around here, but it's like the Tyson Strubers of the world they're not panning out.
Right.
And so a lot of those guys are leaving, and that bridge just collapsed. And so unfortunately, you're having to constantly get guys quicker. You're speeding up the progression. And to me, again, in a developmental program, the problem that comes up with this is that it forces a recruiting staff that isn't really known for going out and getting guys that can come in that maybe only need a year or two to get ready. Again, their bread and butter is finding guys that need maybe 2 to 3 to 4 years to get ready. And you're now asking them to get out of their comfort zone from a recruiting side of things. And so, again, long-winded answer is I think it's easier for people to look at the recruiting rankings and say, well, we're better off just getting these 2-star guys anyway, because that's who the staff develops better. To some extent, yes. But you cannot afford. I think K-State's done a great job, Cole, at evaluating, scouting, recruiting, landing the top-tier guys.
Yeah.
Not just Avery Johnson, but, Will Howard was considered a top-tier guy in his class. They got the most out of him. VJ Payne was considered a top-tier guy in his class. He's lived up to that billing. Again, Avery Johnson, Asa Newsome was headed that direction until the injury this year. And they've done a really good job at identifying the lower level guys, the Felix Anudikes, the DJ Giddens was more of a blue shirt, but, Jace Brown, Chidi Obiazar, those type of guys, where they seem to be finding themselves in between a rock and a hard place, is maybe taking a few too many gambles in the heart of, their recruiting classes,
where the depth is going to be.
And that's where, again, I think it's very easy to toss a lot of these transfers to the side. A guy like Wesley Watson, a guy that did not play this year, a guy that, on the surface, no big deal. We'll find somebody that's got 4 years of eligibility, just like Wesley, and it's no big deal. But Wesley Watson was a guy, had he been healthy, that probably would have been playing some special teams this year. Wesley Watson is a guy that come next year, if he's still around, knows the playbook. There isn't that transition that he has to make. And so now you're trying to bring guys in that, even if they're better than Wesley Watson, might still need that transition year. And so, again, long-winded answer here is, yes, K-State has the ability now to go out and improve, to get better players. And from that angle, these transfers maybe aren't that big of a deal. But when you start to lose significant chunks of your class, and not just preferred walk-ons, scholarship guys that Kansas State looked at and said, you are good enough to do this at our school, and they're not panning out. Or, there are attitude issues, character concerns, guys that aren't giving effort. There's maybe some red flags that were missed. You start to have bulk of classes start to leave like that. It puts you in a position that, again, I don't think K-State really wants to be in as a developmental program.
This is a perfect time to take a break.
I ran us out of the first half.
This is a perfect time to take a break. I have nothing to add on that question. This is not done. We're going to take a quick break here on the Powercat Podcast. We'll be back with a whole lot more transfer portal and everything else K-State athletics. We'll be back. Back in here on the Powercat Podcast, Cole Carmody, along with Ryan Wallace. You bring up great points in your last answer, and we're going to get back into some questions here in a second. But there's a lot of guys that you talked about that I think very easily could have left, right? Like that were in that group of guys that if they left at the time, fans would have said, oh, it's no big deal. And quite honestly, maybe the coaching staff might have thought, oh, it's no big deal. One of those guys is DJ Giddens. If DJ Giddens leaves after his redshirt season, he's a blue shirt. It's no big deal. Daniel Green, he was around before the transfer portal was even a thing. If Daniel Green leaves after his redshirt freshman season when he hardly played, oh, it's no big deal. Those are the kind of guys that need to stick around Kansas State. I don't think they're getting back to this question here from Americat. I'll show it up there so fans can kind of remember what we were talking about. I don't necessarily think there's any locker room concerns. I think this is just the modern age of A, college football, and B, this is where things are heading. And as unfortunate as it is for K-State, that's just kind of the state of the program right now, that they're going to have to try and find a way to convince kids to stick around. And that leads us right into one of our next questions.
Can I bring up one more thing real quick? Just because, and I meant to say this, and you brought it up, and I think that's very accurate, is I do think that that's one area. It's not just about recruiting better at K-State. I think some of it, too, is K-State has a right to be very high about their culture. What Chris Kleiman has built is outstanding in terms of the foundation, in terms of getting guys – to think universally and collectively about pounding the stone and getting better, every day. And I think by and large, this locker room is incredibly united. And I think we saw that at times this season. Yeah, there were some guys that didn't buy in. Maybe some of them are in the transfer portal for that reason. But I do think, Cole, as you just accurately stated, that roster retention has got to be something that they put a little bit more emphasis on moving forward. I do think that there are signs of K-State. It's not being lackadaisical, but in a sense, maybe thinking that their culture is good enough to keep guys around. That things we're good here. Everybody's happy. I think maybe they need to have, and again, I don't know the structure throughout the season. Maybe they are having weekly meetings with guys and trying to figure out where guys are. But I think just maybe not waiting around until the end, if they do that. I hope they don't. To kind of see where guys are, trying to get a little bit better gauge of roster retention so that you're not scrambling to, figure things out there at the end of the season. Because I do think, as you said, Cole, even the greatest cultures, even if you're going, 13-0, are going to have guys that just are going to be intrigued by the transfer portal and getting a fresh start. K-State's got to put a little bit more emphasis on roster retention. If they're guys that you don't think are going to work out here, that's fine. But then you got to know, you got to start kind of preparing for that in advance, that, okay, we thought maybe we needed a developmental guy, say it outside linebacker. We might need a guy that's a little bit more ready to go, and you can start that process in September instead of November, December.
Well, you bring up a great point about guys being happy, and one way to talk about guys being happy, unfortunately, in this new landscape, Topeka Tomcat, by the way, new subscriber, so welcome to the website. First post, actually, in this questions thread, so shout out to you. Can K-State be competitive in the NIL space was the gist of his question. I'm going to take this first because I think a lot of it, unfortunately, we've seen some NIL stuff out there, and I hope people understand that a lot of the stuff that's being floated out there, there's a lot of inaccuracies. First of all, that there's a lot of rumors. Like, that's the day and age we live in, is that there are a lot of rumors. Yes, K-State is very competitive in the NIL space. That's part of the reason why a kid, like an Avery Johnson, Avery Johnson didn't come to K-State because of NIL, but it definitely didn't hurt, right? Like, anytime you can offer that to a recruit, that's going to help. And let it be known that they're not allowed to offer recruits any kind of NIL package. That is a completely different sector of athletics. But I mean, as far as the collectives go, I do think K-State is competitive. You've seen it in basketball. I mean, you don't land a 5-star recruit regardless of the great culture that this coaching staff is building. There is NIL behind that. And so, I mean, that's just the way that the college sports works. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think people look at NIL, the connotation of NIL is if you have a lot of NIL, then you're a shady program. Shady, by the way. That's what I said. I didn't say anything bad
I heard
there.
you.
Shady. I don't believe that to be true. I think if you have a competitive NIL, you're doing your athletes a favor. And I think they have a competitive NIL. Could it be better? For sure. But I just, when players leave and the rumor is because that it is NIL related, I don't believe that's because K-State can't compete in that landscape.
Yeah. I think for me with NIL and again, that's kind of a realm that I do my best to stay out of. It's kind of one of those things where like ignorance is bliss. Like I know it's happening, but I would really rather not know the numbers. I definitely don't really want to report on numbers and any of that kind of thing. But the gist of what I've gotten from K-State's NIL landscape is that I think by and large, it's probably better than the average fan, certainly the national outsider would probably give it credit for. I think they've got a lot of folks that are eager and that have proven they'll pony up some dollars, right? For Kansas State athletes. I think, and I've said this publicly without pointing fingers super hard. But I think by and large, though, there's folks at the controls. And when I say controls, I'm not talking about those with the money, those that are in charge of these collectives. So you get the gist of what I'm saying when I'm saying folks at the controls are just kind of apathetic towards it, are just kind of passive about it. I think that there's still kind of a belief that like we can still win and we can still do a lot of great things without NIL. And yeah, I think part of that is true, but I think part of that is we've seen now it's here to stay. And we hope that there's more guardrails on it. We hope that there's, better just restrictions and what have you, so that it's not the wild, wild west. But at the same time, like, it's one of those things that like, if everybody else is doing it, you kind of got to do it. And I'm going to use KU as an example here. And it's not to say that KU is doing anything differently than Kansas State. So I don't want anyone listening to say, oh, well, Wally said that this is how KU's doing it. And that means K-State isn't. I'm just using them as an example because, again, in some ways, I almost feel more comfortable talking about what I've heard from the KU side as I do from the K-State side in a weird way. But I think Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold aren't all that, what's the word I'm looking for? They're a lot more alike in this area than I think maybe you would assume. I don't know. But from what I've gathered about KU is they've got a lot of interest in the NIL market. They're starting to really put some dollars up, which you kind of expected all along. And you were like, why can't KU win, guys? They're finally starting to do that. It's not just being focused and directed towards basketball anymore. But I think Lance Leipold's done something. And again, I think Chris Kleiman's probably doing this as well. But it's like, here's the limit that I'm going to put on it.
Right.
This is, I'd rather not, start to go above said number to get guys. If we got to go above that, they're probably guys that I don't want here in the first place. But anything we got to do within that number, let's go for it. Let's take a shot. And so I think for K-State, I think the pieces are there, but you got to kind of put the puzzle together. I think you've got a lot of really engaged folks that want to see K-State do well, and they're willing to, again, back it. But I also think K-State, those in control, got to say, all right, let's put some strategy behind this and maybe start thinking a little bit more outside the box to make this happen. And I'll give one example here, Cole. And this is an example because I do want to show that K-State has done this in the past and they're willing to do things like this, but how often? I don't know. But you see the stuff like the Wagyu beef, right? They're big on it. And you see some other public facing things like the Robbins Motor Company and that sort of thing. But Law MacArthur. But there's some other things that I think you'll see other schools do. And K-State just hasn't done it maybe in the limelight as much. And maybe they should. Maybe at a place like K-State, you need to do this more, this outside the box stuff. But like Eli Huggins, I was told, was kind of toying back and forth with whether he wanted to return to K-State last year. Thank God he did, because he ended up being enormous for Kansas State. But one of the ways that I was told that K-State kind of swung him in that direction because he loved K-State, but it was just like, I'm kind of done with academics and everything. Apparently, Eli Huggins loves to play golf. And they were able to team with Colbert Hills to get him a golf package to
That's
where he
awesome.
could go play Colbert Hills.
All right.
And there you go. And so that's the type of stuff that I think there are ways and there are angles where I think K-State could make more with less, if you want to put it that way, even though I don't think they're as low as people think they are. But you've got to have guys that are ready and willing to do it. And I think for whatever reason, Cole, we've seen there's still some hesitancy on K-State's part to really get around a table and say, let's put our heads together and figure this thing out so that we can start to put together and be more competitive on a Power 5 level.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Last question here as we start to wrap up the podcast. One we might go off the rails on, so apologize in advance, but that's why you're listening. Harry Dangler, it's an interesting name. Once again, a new subscriber. Welcome to the website. Is football recruiting picking up momentum? Wait, is that what I said? Yeah, what does it say? Is football picking up recruiting momentum? Same thing. This is going to be fun to watch because it is fast and furious. Like, I haven't looked at my phone since we've been recording this, but it wouldn't surprise me if K-State has like 7 portal commits already, right? Like any minute stuff can break. I mean, Easton Kilty, the North Dakota transfer, committed to K-State at about 9:15 on Instagram. Thank goodness you saw that. I definitely didn't see it. He hasn't used his Twitter since 2019, but he decided to post all of his offers except K-State. And then all of a sudden he comes on a visit, commits to K-State, and that's momentum right there. There have been some other visitors on campus. There are expected to be other visitors this weekend on campus. So the answer to the question is yes. Will we see commits? I would imagine so. Who that would be, we'll find out. But yeah, they're starting to kind of piece together that class. Signing day, obviously, as we talked about, is coming up. It's here and it's fast and furious.
This is an enormous weekend for K-State recruiting, because I think the longer you start to get into this transfer portal window, and what I mean by, the longer you go, I mean into the month of December, it's a 30-day window. So I think it's there's a couple days after like the new year where a kid could still jump in. And again, when I say the window, that doesn't mean like the door closes and coaches aren't allowed to still get guys out of the transfer portal. It just means you can't go in. There will not be any more new faces going in after trying to remember, like the 5th maybe of January, 6th of January, right. Something like that. So anyway, as we've already seen in college football, those that strike early are the ones that, strike hot, because the earlier you can get on guys, the better, because the transfer portal moves incredibly quick. You're dealing with a lot of kids that it's more NFL-like, from what I'm told. There was a Power 5 coach that I reached out to kind of ask about the transfer portal, and he said it's becoming very NFL-like, where the recruiting goes incredibly quick. And so if you don't strike quickly, you're going to lose. These kids have already been wined and dined, a lot of them. They know exactly what they want. They know exactly the questions they want you to answer. And if you don't have it, and they don't have time to dilly-dally around. And so, again, the longer you get through into this window, the less chance that you're going to maybe get some of the guys that would help you most.
Yep.
Right. And so from what I'm hearing, there could be, I think, up to like 7, maybe 8 transfers on K-State's campus this weekend. And I think you're going to see several guys that they're bringing them on a visit they really want. A couple DBs. I think Jordan Riley from Ball State that they just offered, I think he's supposed to be there. I had heard, I'm still trying to confirm, Savion Riley from Vanderbilt is another safety that I think they've liked. I don't know if they've offered publicly. Again, they're kind of weird. Kansas State's doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes this year. Easton Kilty being a prime example, where he was apparently offered like 2 days into the transfer portal, and he listed all the offers but K-State. Why K-State wouldn't want that publicly facing to say like, hey, we've arrived and we're going to get the number 2 offensive tackle in the transfer portal. why they like kind of snuck him behind the scenes onto campus is interesting to me. I don't know if they're trying again to like hide him from other teams that could get him on campus, but anyway, they're doing a lot behind the scenes, Cole. And so there could be a lot of other guys that we're not even aware of that could be visiting. But again, I think Jordan Riley, we know for a fact it's confirmed Josiah Galvin, the DB from Northern Iowa, will be in town. Trent Hudson, I believe, is coming to town from New Mexico State. They might also get the UTEP wide receiver in town as well this weekend. So just massive, because if you get out of this weekend without some of those guys committing, you start to think about the timeline here, Cole. You've got early signing day coming up the following Wednesday. So K-State's going to be trying to, tie the bow on their high school class, which could include maybe adding some late steals to that class, in addition to trying to retain some guys that have been pried upon. And so then a couple days after that, you start to kind of near the quote holiday season, and guys are gearing up to go to Orlando for the bowl game. And again, it's not like K-State can't recruit while they're in Orlando for the Pop-Tarts Bowl, but like, will they? You can't host anybody from Orlando. So this is an enormous stretch of days coming up late this week, this weekend, and maybe kind of into next week. Because after that, I just don't know if there's going to be a lot of time for K-State to, really do the damage that I think they want and need to do in the portal after that.
These are the guys on their A list, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way you got to look at it. You have your A list, and then you have your backup options. And as they will never ever admit that to a kid publicly, what have you, but you have the kids that you want to go after. And so if they don't get these kids, they have another group of kids who they're very much willing to go after. But you're right. I mean, it's going to be crazy. It's a crazy time. I think this transfer portal class could be as big as the high school class, if not bigger. I don't, especially the early signing day class. It depends on, who decides to leave after the bowl game. Is maybe they'll add a few players to their high school class after early signing day.
Right.
I think the signing day class is pretty much set in stone. We saw Blake Barnett. Taylor Bratt was out to visit him. Puts out a picture, says, I can't wait to be a K-State Wildcat. That was one guy that I know fans were really curious about, the all-time touchdowns leader in Colorado prep history. So that's a guy I think you got to feel confident about, maybe retaining. But again, there's just so many guys in the transfer portal that K-State are on that nobody knows about. And so there's some intrigue there, but, we'll find out at some point.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is, like you said, the bulk of their high school class is pretty much set in stone, as long as, everybody sticks around. And for the most part, it doesn't look like anybody is itching to leave anywhere. So getting those guys retained and signed on Wednesday, but then also, again, trying not to let many of these guys get out of town this weekend without committing. Because again, you just start flirting with more teams trying to get involved, guys wanting to take some extra visits. So as much as Kansas State can do to try and finish this thing out as best they can, with all but, maybe one or two spots still left, try and get it done by signing day.
If you didn't have an excuse to go to the basketball game on Sunday already, with everything else going on, K-State hosts Nebraska at 2:00 on Sunday. There's going to be a lot of fireworks. You would imagine those players would be in attendance. Well, Wally, thanks so much. This has been fun. We only got to 4 questions. That's because all we do is talk.
Yeah, I kind of ran the clock out on number 2, and it was a hard one for me to try to explain, but hopefully I kind of sort of maybe explain myself a little bit with bridging the gap.
The conversations are timely. That's all that matters.
Okay.
We appreciate your support. Don't forget, we do have a sale here at GoPowercat, 60% off. Make sure you head on over, subscribe to GoPowercat, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. It helps us grow. Give us a like and follow us everywhere on social media. We definitely appreciate it. I'm Cole. That's Wally. Thanks everybody so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.